Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/377, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 377th edition of the Pedalshift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thank you so much for joining. In this episode, follow along on an in-depth, step-by-step journey of transforming a surprisingly decent Ozark Trail mountain bike into the very first Pedalshift eBike, and we're at N equals 3 or 4 if you're counting. This mega pod will take you on the journey from the initial setup to the final tweaks, including component replacements, brake and pedal adjustments, and the install of the incredibly important mid-drive motor. I am hardly a bike mechanic, so will things go sideways at least once, like my typical bike misadventures? Folks, I am super excited to bring you this episode. This is literally months in the making. It's an unusual episode in the sense that it is quite the time machine and there's quite a bit of time jumps. It's also, I'm going to be honest, it's going to be a bit long. It's about an hour and a half when all is said and done, including this intro. So listen along if you'd like. It does get pretty detailed. It is part of the journey. It is edited, believe it or not. It may not feel like it, but it is. So basically, here we are. I got an e-bike. I built an e-bike. And where did I end up? How did I end up getting to this point? So a little bit of a review for all of the kind of preview episodes throughout this year. I decided on a build over a buy, because ultimately at the end of the day, it brought me more flexibility and got me exactly what I wanted. I also started to do more research on kind of the brand lock-in that you end up with other bikes and other brands. And if you've got one like that, there are tons of advantages that outweigh that perhaps for you. But for me, I decided I wanted to have more flexibility. And I think ultimately I'm glad I'm there despite, well, you'll hear. I decided on getting a new bike over a used bike. And the reason was I spent literally months scouring all of the usual places, your Craigslist, your Facebook marketplaces, things like that. And there just wasn't a good bike that hit all of the notes that I wanted, that wasn't more than $1,000 or even more than that, or way more bike than I really needed, considering I was going to be taking out certain components of it in order to make it into an e-bike. And I landed on a very strange place, and I do talk about it a little bit on the episode, but I ended up purchasing a very surprising bike, and that is a Walmart bike. Yes, surprise, pick yourself off the floor. But the Ozark Trail 29er, it's a mountain bike. It's got front suspension, hardtail. It is very well reviewed amongst real deal mountain bikers. Now, not saying it's the greatest bike ever, but for $300 US, it was exactly what I wanted, and at a price point that made my ability to do other things and make other purchases and other investments make a lot of sense. And I have to say, it's been great. So normally I'm not a fan of the cheap components that come on bikes from big box stores like your Walmarts, but this one actually is pretty good. I am going to be slowly replacing certain things over time. There is one issue with it that I still am dealing with that I'll talk a little bit more about in this episode and beyond, but I'm actually really surprised at how well that ended up working out. For the drive, I ended up, as is probably no surprise to folks listening to the earlier episodes, a mid-drive motor made by Bafang, which is available in a lot of different places directly from them or from Amazon. I also got it packaged up with a 52-volt, 20-amp-hour frame-mounted battery. It is smaller than Biking Brian's, but it has still got a lot of capacity to it. I think it is going to serve me well for some of my initial riding. For the kind of Biking Brian style rides, I think I'm going to end up getting a second battery, and there are elements with this battery that are not as good as I would like, which we'll discover in this particular episode of the Megapod here. So more on that in this episode. I watched a ton of YouTube videos and I bought some tools, and I bought some expensive tools too. And some of them are really, really great. And I'm really glad I did. And I feel like now I'm going to be able to do more and more of my own bike work. I struggled a little bit early. I got my confidence later, and I'm very excited about where I started and where I'm at right now. So more on that you'll hear in this episode. It took me more than a few weeks because the bike was living here in West Virginia at my cabin, and I was back and forth a few times and doing some travel throughout the summer. So I wasn't able to do this all in one sitting. My belief system in myself was very high about being able to install certain things in a short period of time, and I was quickly disabused of that notion. You'll hear about that. This was a journey, and the episode, as I mentioned, is a bit on the long side, but definitely brings you along tour journal style for how the whole thing went. So I hope you enjoy.
All right, this is day one of the e-bike build. This is an Ozark Trail Walmart bike. It gets excellent reviews. I have a small amount of mountain biking experience from years ago. Bikes have gotten much better, but this will easily be the best mountain bike I would have ever had. The components are actually pretty good, but the ones that aren't as good are definitely being replaced, and the ones that aren't up to snuff for e-bike use definitely being replaced. Today, I am working on getting things done to the point where it makes sense. I do not currently have my Bafang middrive motor. I do, however, have a variety of other things that are going to be a part of this build. I have already installed, so on day 0, we'll call it, a stem riser to get the handlebars much further up. Originally, I was considering getting a different set of handlebars, perhaps a Jones loop or something equivalent. I'll be honest, I'm not used to flat bars, and these are fairly wide. I think there's plenty of room on them for what I think I need, at least. So for the moment, I think I'm just going to go with the stock bars. That would be on the list of things to replace in the future. It wouldn't take a lot of effort to do that. The things that I have replaced so far, or we're in the process of doing it, the grips. The grips that came with this are basic and fine, but I wanted some more comfort for the time they'll be in there. I did not get the Ergon grips. I went with a different brand, a German brand that gets very good reviews, and that is the Wittkopf. Since 1898, so they must be doing something right. So those are very similar to the Ergon grips. They'll be nice and comfortable and cushy for the flat bars. The other things that I got, and they are in transit, not here, replacement tires. These are actually really nice knobby Kenda tires, I'll be honest, and there's plenty of clearance. They are 2.35 inches wide, 29er tires. Rolling on knobbies doesn't make sense for me. I'll hold on to these tires should I end up doing any real gravel or trail riding on this bike. But I'm replacing them with a newish brand, I think in the last year or two, from Schwalbe. They have a e-bike, the AI Grounder, is on its way from Europe. Got a really good deal, shockingly good deal from a guy on eBay in the UK, and he has good reviews and everything, so I went with that. That should be coming imminently, around the same time perhaps as my motor. I just finished installing a pack rack, Iberia, a rear rack. It's pretty good. I'd say it's a mid-grade rack, certainly perfectly good for my needs. I know that it will definitely work just great for hauling any kind of panniers or anything along those lines. I did want something pretty lightweight. I couldn't justify getting a heavier steel rack, so this one's aluminum. I've had mixed results with, but I think this is going to be just fine. I am going to try to keep weight off of the rear as much as I can, including myself, but that's for a different show. So I think that this will be fine, and it installed just great with this bigger format frame. It's a lot easier to get things on. The clearances are much better. The first bike I've ever had with disc brakes, so I'm learning about those. They are adjusted just fine, so I think they're going to be just perfectly good. The other thing is the front suspension. It's a little softer than what I want, so if it is adjustable, I might make it have a little bit more give to it. If not, that's something I can swap out. But these forks are apparently pretty good. The components are very good. The disc brakes are not considered high end, but they worked fine. They've been adjusted fine out of the box. For a quote unquote Walmart bike, whomever put it together just great. And I know that a lot of folks in reviews say you got to be careful because it's usually not assembled well. Well, this was assembled very well. The next big thing I'm going to be replacing, not removing today, getting ready for replacement, are the pedals. I am a stock pedals guy, but these are straight garbage. And although I will not throw them in the garbage, and I will probably hold on to them, they are not great. I bought another relatively inexpensive, but not low-end mountain bike. Nice big coverage, nice grip to them. Those will go on. The cranks also will be replaced. I've heard middling things about the cranks, but they'll be replaced because there are cranks that specifically fit the Bafang, so that will be fine. The big thing for today, and something I've never done before, is the removal of the bottom bracket. I have a bottom bracket removal tool and a crank puller. I think I'm just going to take this really slow and we'll go from there. The other thing coming off is the chain. The big reason why the chain's coming off is it's very unlikely that this chain will fit for the new Bafang mid-drive motor. This is a very small front chain ring, probably 32 teeth, and I'm going with 44 teeth, go orange. That was not intentional, but there it is, for the Bafang. And the reason why I'm going kind of in the middle for those is I want the nice mix of being able to have speed but still have climbing ability. I may change my mind. I may go to a lower one, particularly if I end up deciding to upgrade the chainring that comes with it. There's another brand, Lecky, made for e-bikes. It has a small tooth and then a large tooth, and it's been described as sort of really gripping into chains. So I am considering that. That'd be about a $100 upgrade, give or take. But I'm going to try it with the existing one. I'm going to try everything with as much of the stock stuff as possible, with the exception of the stuff that I talked about. The tires, I don't think would be rated for e-bike use. They wouldn't roll well on pavement or surfaces I'll be on more. The pedals, as I mentioned. Most of everything else I'm keeping. I'm just adding on to the bike. This is exciting. Everything has gone smoothly. I'm starting to think I want to ride this more with the new stuff, but I realized I took the grips off and it wouldn't be very comfortable to ride. And I'm not going to put the new grips on until later because a whole lot of things need to go onto the handlebars, including, of course, throttle. There's a front light that comes with it. That's actually another kind of nice thing, is that I'll have an integrated front light that'll run off the battery. So just fun stuff. I really considered purchasing the easy button, not having to build it. But this is a lot more fun and is forcing me to improve my tool game. I have a new T-handle set for my tools, which is nice to have. I've always been using the stuff that you use on tour, like the little mini sets. And it's so much better when you have a more proper tool for sort of like, at-home wrenching. So that's kind of nice to have. And it certainly made the installation of the rack go a lot faster. Looking at the clearance with the rack, I have no doubt my new tires will fit just fine. There's just plenty of clearance there. And the interesting thing will be what I decide to do from a fender perspective. I think I've decided I'm going to not have kind of traditional fenders on this bike. I think what I might have is sort of the kind of clip-on styles or some other type of more mountain biking style version of it, just because I'm finding that I want something a little bit easier to transport. All right, next step is the removal of the pedals, bottom bracket, and the chain. I'll tell you how that goes. Pedals off, no problem. The crank bolt, no problem. Cannot pull these things off. No idea what's going on. I have the crank extractor. I just cannot physically remove this. I'm giving up. I'm going to take this to the bike shop in Hancock, and I'm just going to have them take the bottom bracket, the cranks and the bottom bracket off. I may bring the tools and say, hey, do I have the right tool? There are different types of crank extractors, tapered and non-tapered. Maybe I have the wrong one. This does not seem to be like it should be this hard, so I'm just wondering if that's the situation they've got. I'm okay with that. I have heard and watched and read that the removal of a bottom bracket can, especially for a first timer, be very difficult. I've seen people use really long wrenches to get proper leverage. I have these little dumb dollar store crescent wrenches, and I just don't think that I'm going to get the leverage. I'm just rounding things off, and this is in harder than I have the tools for. So learning experience, which is very good, but I also am impatient, and I would like to get this bottom bracket off and be ready when the motor comes. And then when the motor comes, it comes with the things that I'll need to install. So I think that that will be fine. Hopefully I'll be able to put enough oomph on the tightening, but I am also thinking of getting Mookie, very excited, getting a better wrench to properly put these things on, assembling the tools I need. This is not the most expensive crank extractor and bottom bracket removal tool, but I don't think that's the problem. I was hoping my pedal wrench would fit and give me leverage. It does not fit, too small. I think they make pedal wrenches that include the crank, the size that's necessarily to remove a crank. For those of you who do this more often than me are probably yelling, and you're a podcast player. So yeah, I am learning as we go along, but what I am most learning is sometimes videos make it look easier than it is. And most importantly, the tools that folks have don't seem much better than what you have, but they are. And I think that might be the case. It may be that these cranks are on really tight. That's another possibility. So we'll see. I am happy that I got to this point. I'm kind of waiting on other parts to come anyways. So it's not like I'm falling behind in terms of getting this on together. I also, while I would love to get this all assembled within the next few days, I don't need it in the next few days, but I would like to have it in the next few days. I'm a little impatient to get this thing on, but if I force something, I could screw things up, stripping threads, things like that, and we don't want that. Day one, moderately successful. The easy stuff was easy. The hard stuff was hard. I don't mind throwing 20 to 30 bucks at a bike shop, removing this bottom bracket for me. Or I don't know how much it will be, but I'm going to assume it's something like that. More to come. On the second day of everything, a couple of things of note for the build. I did take the bike to C&O Bicycles in Hancock, and their mechanic was not in today despite being open, but that's fine. I am first in queue, I think, for getting the bottom bracket removed tomorrow. Probably be done sometime in the, perhaps even in the morning. They're open, I believe, at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So depending on what time the mechanic gets there, it should be a trivial thing for them to be able to remove. They'll have the proper tools and everything, and the ability and the know-how, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll just go down and get that. I suspect it's probably going to be somewhere between $25 and $40 for the removal, which is annoying. I'm going to have to pay that, but I would rather get this done right. And in that point of reference, or with that in mindset, maybe is a better way of putting it, I've done something else in the last day. I've become convinced that reprogramming the stock configuration for the Bafang motor is a good idea, because I have, as you might expect, watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and for $13 or so, you can buy a cable to plug it into your computer and reprogram. The biggest criticism that I have seen of the Bafangs, and something that concerns me, is that the assist levels are a little wonky out of the default menu. There's assist levels of 0 through 9, and they're not spaced well. And it's interesting because I ran into a guy who had a Bafang installed on his recumbent at the shop today. He confirms that in assist level 1, it's a little too fast, and that things are not spaced out well from 1 through 5 or 1 through 9, depending on the controller. I've been convinced you want the low levels to be truly low and not be super aggressive, because that way you can kind of get started in a way that is not going to pop a wheelie or otherwise do things that are going to be problematic. I have a 750 watt motor, not the most aggressive. You could get a 1,000 watt one, but I think that it's still a pretty powerful motor. And when especially you're doing any riding around people, which I do think is going to be a thing that will happen a lot, multi-use trails, you want that assist level to be relatively low, so you're not going too fast for the conditions. And B, when you are getting that assist, that it's not just like rocketing you out from 0 to very fast. This reprogramming allows that. I'm kind of thinking of doing that as soon as I get the motor, basically to have it so that it is set up that way prior to install. Just something I want to do. I'll have it hooked up to the battery. I'll be able to tell it's okay and working and all of that, which I think is going to be very helpful right out of the box. I would love to install this fully before I go back to DC on Wednesday evening. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I don't know if I'm going to have time to do all of it. I don't know if I'm going to run into any issues. It does seem pretty straightforward to put in there. But then there's cable management and things like that where I think I'm going to be probably a little fussier. I haven't decided if I'm going to just try to install it and then redo cable management. We'll just have to kind of decide to see. I have a really interesting bike that has internal cable routing opportunities, which I think I would like to do. However, that's also going to be fussy. I'm not sure if that's going to be something that I'm going to want to do out of the gate. I might zip tie things down, make it as neat as possible so that I've got a functional bike, and then decide to do other things later. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. The bike is not here. The bike is at the shop and will be ready for me to go probably a full day before I have the motor available, which will probably be coming on Tuesday afternoon. So that's all very exciting. I'm going to have everything here with the exception of the tires by the time the motor gets here. That makes me happy because I should be able to have a bike that can roll with pedal assist. I'll be doing it on tires. I don't think I would like to go too far on, but I should be able to test it out. More to come. I'm starting to feel confident about my ability to handle this once the hard stuff is done. As most videos suggest, removing the bottom bracket on many bikes can be very difficult. So the next time you'll hear from me will be talking about the actual install. I am back with the bike and asked the mechanic, hey, was it hard to get the cranks off? He's like, yeah, nah, it was fine. Just use a crank puller. Clearly, I didn't have the right tool because I was using a cheap wrench. I bought the crank puller and everything, but I just clearly need a better wrench. So I will look to add that to my tool collection. It's fun to have this bike back with the bottom bracket off. I'm leaning in and seeing if there's anything crazy. There is not. There are some bottom brackets that, or once you take out the bottom bracket, there's some, I don't know what the cavity is, if that's also called a bottom bracket, but that sometimes will have nubbins in it, for lack of a better word, and you have to file those off to properly get through the Bafang motor. But just kind of sticking my finger in and looking around, it does not seem like that's the case. With this bike, the one guy who actually made a YouTube video for this particular bike did not seem like he ran into that. Shout out to that guy. He is a beginner like me, it seems. He seems to be more handy than me. But yeah, he was putting a spacer in on there, which I'll talk about later, that was way too big, so much so that he couldn't really secure the motor down too much. And all the comments were like, you need that extra piece that you called to secure that motor in. So yeah, in the subsequent video, he made the spacer smaller and it was much better. I, because of that video, bought very specific spacers for this Bafang's brand. I spent extra for it. I mean, they're just like little aluminum circles. I can just layer those up as necessary to get the clearance net that I'll need. But I am excited because I've got all the parts now except for the motor. Today, I received the programming cable, which I'm excited about. I have an extremely old netbook. Not a netbook. What do we call these? I can't even remember. It's literally the size of my hand. It's an Asus. It's my only computer that runs Windows. I've got the Windows program for the programming. I understand there may be some Mac options coming out, and I may try them at some point. This came with a USB-C adapter, so I could use it on the Mac, but I figure I may as well do this with Windows to start and get that thing programmed down. As I was driving, I was kind of reflecting a little bit on power output, especially at low levels, because one of the things that I think I would like to spend more time on, and Mookie's got his toys, you can hear, One other thing I'd really like to spend time on in terms of dialing this in is to make sure that I've got at the low levels a really low amount of energy usage, so that when I am riding, especially on days where I'm feeling good and feeling strong and it's flat, I'm not using much battery, just enough to maintain a faster speed than I can normally bike consistently. So I'm going to play around with that. And I've seen some really interesting videos about the percentage limits of voltage that comes off of the battery at these different levels. And it's really interesting seeing what's in stock. In stock, it's a massive amount of initial voltage. Even at pedal assist level 1, I don't think I want that. If I want more, I'll dial it up to pedal assist level 4 or 5. I want a very limited start and then a very limited ramp up, so I'm not rocketing out when I use the pedal assist. But I also want to make it usable. I'm glad I got this. I resisted getting this when I first ordered it. Thought, oh no, that's the one thing too many. Let's just do basics. And I think what I've learned, the basics may not be dialed in right for me. So I'm glad I spent $13 on this. I dug up the old little Asus notebook that will run that app for me. So, all right, yeah, I got tools all over every horizontal surface I have. Yeah, I'm gonna be able to put a bunch of them away, but there's a bunch of steps to come. Most importantly, it's of course the installation of the motor and a little bit of basic cable management, and then some other things like putting on some sensors that need to go on there, including brake sensors, so that it knows when I'm braking to cut the motor, which is an important thing. It's a safety thing too. In case the throttle gets engaged or something like that, you can just squeeze on brakes and it'll stop. I have another sensor that will interrupt the motor when I'm shifting. And it's interesting because there's some folks that say, oh, you don't really need that. And then there are some folks that say you really want this because it's going to prevent wear on your chain and help components last longer. So I'm inclined to put this on. It seems like it's a very simple type of thing to put on there, but that will require me to cut my shifting cable and do some other things with that I've never done before. So I think that I may do that last, and I may even kind of delay that one the most, because it's helpful. I want it on there to know if I've done this right, especially before I leave this bike for a couple of weeks when I go up to DC. It will be nice to know that it's at least installed in a functional way. That's kind of my goal. But whether I will get there or not, open question. Open question, folks. All right, well, that is it for today. We're in a bit of a holding pattern. The bottom bracket is off, and this bike is as ready as it can be, absent a couple of things. I need to loosen up the shifter and the brakes on the handlebars. There's going to be a throttle and the display for the system, which will control a bunch of things. Exciting to have this bike back when it only costs $12. Shouts out, C&O Bicycle has been really, really great for me. Are they always awesome? No, but no bike shop I've ever experienced has a 100% record. But they are great in a pinch. They're great for things when you're on the C&O Trail and you're riding through Hancock. Couldn't recommend them more for stuff you need on a tour or any kind of an adventure on the C&O. They're fantastic, and they're open 7 days a week during on season, which they did not used to be. So that's pretty cool. All right, more to come. It has arrived. Mookie's excited, but I am charging the battery, and it is smaller than I expected. Did not expect to hear that out of my mouth, that it is smaller than expected. But it's gonna work out great, I think. I'm excited about that. I think the plate you attach to the bike is actually attached to this, and I can confirm if I unlock it. I plugged it into the charger. It comes with a 3-amp charger, and I'm gonna try to not make this super nerdy for folks who don't need to or want to learn about the electrical elements of all of this, but the higher the amperage, the more juice that's going into the battery, basically. And so the rate of it, it's basically the size of the pipe in a sense too. It's how much juice is going in. And it's 3 amps is not what I would call a trickle charge, but it's also not a fast charge either. I've done research and I could go for a fast charge up to 10 amps. I may not do that, but I think I'm going to get a fast charger as a supplement to bring with me on tours or adventures where my bike is going to be going for my attempts at least for 100 miles or more in a day. I would need that or a second battery. And just feeling how heavy these batteries are, I think that that would be obviously a lot of additional weight. Charger, I would probably be able to get from 20% charge to 80% charge in a matter of like 90 minutes or so, give or take. And of course, all these things will really vary. And that's sort of the sweet spot in terms of charging. Doing any kind of a slow charge up to 100% overnight is certainly a good way to go, but it's better for the battery as well. But for the fast charge, you can really just pour the juice in if you've got the right setup for it. There's a barrel connection going into this. That's obviously something that I will have to look out and see what kind of amperage maximum there is for those. When I did some of the look-sees at the various different types of charging connectors, I believe one could go up pretty high, at least to 5 amps and maybe more. So that's going to be something I'm going to need to do some more research on before I take this out on any kind of larger adventure. I am also kind of slowly unpacking some of the other things that came with this. The excitement here is, let's see, what else is here? This is an unboxing video with no video. What do we have? This looks like, Mookie is just terribly excited. Ah, my display. This is the P860ML bicycle display. This display is supposed to be one of the newer ones. It's big, I'll say that. It's got another control, so it will take on a lot of heavy lifting. I kind of like it. It's about 1/3 to 1/2 the size of my phone screen, and it is color. I think it will do just great. And of course the motor. That's the real excitement. Last but not least, again, apologies for the dog. Very good packaging. Very well protected. Some tools, zip ties that I will blow through quickly, I'm sure. Cranks, locking nuts, incredibly important. Motor itself. Let's see, lights, front lights. Not sure what it is. Reasonably heavy motor. Between the battery and the motor, that is a substantial amount of weight. So riding on this without any electric power will be something I would like to avoid. I think. I don't know. We'll have to see. Oh, interestingly, there's a crank puller that came with this. Better than the one I bought? Maybe. And a second light. This looks like the headlamp. Well, I don't know what the other one is. Another tool for installation might actually be a bottom bracket removal tool, which is interesting that they would include all of that. Now, of course, I spent all that money on those things that I didn't end up using. And most importantly, 3 silica gels. Should I eat them? Oh no, it says throw away, do not eat. I always make that joke. So we have everything. And I have to say, I'm excited. I'm excited to get this attached to everything. I'm excited to charge up that battery. The first step in all of this is just basically going to get my bike up on the rack. I think that what I'm going to also consider doing is, before anything really gets going too far, I may hook up the motor to the battery and just kind of make sure everything is working before I start the installation process. I think that that's probably a pretty good idea, just to make sure, that the display lights up and other things. I don't think I need to connect everything. Certainly not the speedometer cable. There's a sensor that goes onto the rear wheel that obviously I don't need to do now. It wouldn't be practical. But I guess I could do the light, the display, and some recommended changes to the motor configuration before I put it on. I've got a luxurious amount of time starting in the late afternoon, early evening. So my goal is really, I could conceivably have this built by sundown, depending on my 4 o'clock meeting, which will be the end of my day, but my work day, but then my true fun work begins. And like I said, super exciting to have this all here and to be able to kind of get this bike conceivably rideable, if not, close to finished, at least in a draft version. My goal is to have this ready to roll before I leave the cabin tomorrow afternoon. So I might have screwed up. The bit of research in my memory was right that the barrel chargers, the input to the battery, are lower amperage rated. I didn't realize they were lower than I thought. They're rated 3 to 3.5 amps, and I have a 3 amp charger. So fast charging this battery isn't going to happen unless I break into the battery and figure out a way to put in a fast charger. But the battery management system is probably set for 3 amps. Maybe it can handle more. It's possible. But my initial discovery here about this battery is I am probably going to want to use this in scenarios, this particular battery, where it's a trip within its range or slightly above. I would use a 3 amp charger to get a few more miles of range over a break. It's going to be interesting to test this using this battery for, say, a 40 mile, let's say a 40 to 50 mile, let's say 50 miles. To be able to go 50 miles and then charge it from 20 to 80 and then go another 30 miles. By the way, that may or may not have even been possible. Just in terms of the numbers, I'm making up numbers to make a point. That may not be doable with this battery. I knew that it was potentially the case. It was a roll of the dice, but I wanted to make sure whatever I got would work with this kit and that I could add more batteries later. I think that is what I'm going to end up having to do, which is fine. This battery will probably be useful for a million different things. It may not necessarily be the one that I take out on a multi-day or even multi-week tour of any kind because of the nature of the fast charge. A 3 amp battery charger on this size probably is going to take upwards of 8 hours to charge from 0 to 100. Hopefully I'm not going to be going down to 0 very often. That is not my intention. And actually there are protections within the motor that would stop me from going below a certain voltage, which helps save the battery. But this is my first sort of ready, fire, aim thing. But I did this knowing that this was a possibility. It is a bit of a bummer, but it also goes back to the folks that say, oh, buy your battery separately. The thing that I didn't know, the connector between the battery and the motor. Now I know it's an XT60 or an Anderson hookup. Those don't need to mean anything to you. They're just 2 different types of connectors. Those can handle more voltage. And so ideally what I will do next when I'm ready is to buy another battery that has a higher capacity input in addition to that high capacity output. The output goes to the motor, the input for charging. So that's going to be the idea there, and I will make sure that that is the case. And I might even have the ability to get an even bigger battery, perhaps. So for trips that I really wanted to have both of them, it's obviously a lot of weight to be carrying, but it's possible. And that would certainly give me a great deal of distance, where this battery that I have right now would probably end up being the battery that I use. Well, I don't know if I would use it first or second, but it would be the one that I would be charging overnight at a slower rate alongside the other battery, which would have the ability for fast charge during the day. First, a bit of disappointment, but not the end of the world, not something that is going to make this bad or useless or a waste of money by any stretch of the imagination. Because quite frankly, I think that this battery A full charge on this battery using eco mode or pedal assist 1 may get me 50 to 60 miles depending on conditions, how many hills and whatnot. That is really, really, really remarkable considering, how that would be very fast. That would be a very fast 50 miles, probably done in 2 hours or less. These days, I'm often doing 50 miles and that's my whole day. So there's some really interesting opportunities there for, with this battery just off the top of my head. On a summer day, one could start on the morning with a full charge, go 50 miles, and then find a place where I could charge for basically the rest of the day, and then go out for the last bit of sunlight, maybe into the sunset. That could conceivably get me to 100 miles, depending on conditions. At least it would double capacity. It's just how you would end up managing all of these things. So ultimately, the disappointment's not that disappointing. I think it's still going to do quite a bit. I'm really excited about with this setup, with this battery, is that it very easily has enough juice, I would think, to get me between the cabin and the train station in Martinsburg with great speed and ease compared to what I did earlier this spring. Ditto for getting me to Hancock from the cabins. I think this is going to be a very wonderful, powerful little device for me, and I just got to put it together now. So, all right, enough battery talk. I think the next time you'll be hearing from me, it's going to be getting stuff put on this bike. All right, so we have a fully charged battery and a nice setup. Everything seems to be here, which is good. I have connected and did a little test of the display and of the front headlight. The only thing I'm trying to figure out is the headlight, it seems to be on no matter what. I don't know why, but that bothers me. People who ride e-bikes tend to have their headlight on all the time. That for whatever reason, that just ends up bothering me a little bit. So I may or may not try to figure out how to just turn it on and off. I thought there would be an on and off, but there doesn't seem to be that. So in my display model, which is weird to me because I like to be able to manually turn it on and off. I'll figure that out. There must be a way. I did connect it to the computer and I did my configuration, but I stumbled upon something excellent, and that is that some very smart person did a web-based configuration, which works on the Mac, no problem, which I was happy to discover. I don't need to use this trashy Asus. I can put it away for its lack of usability. Just don't use Windows anymore. So when I run into these Windows-only applications, it always drives me a little crazy. But anyways, I did some things and I checked it out. One thing showing up is that my voltage is showing up as a 48 volt. And I don't know what to think about that. I think ultimately it's one of those scenarios where the motor is a 48 volt nominal, but can go higher and can handle the 52 volt battery. That's what I've read before. So that's what's showing up on the configuration screen. I have it set so the assist levels go from 0 to 9. The current maxes out in two ways: speed or current. In other words, what you're going to be drawing from the battery. And the suggestion was that these things jump out of the gate a little bit too fast. That's not the case with mine. It looks like that mine was put at a very easy, quick ramp up of 10% per assist level, which makes sense, right? And so what'll happen is that the battery will, or the motor will stop drawing more energy once it hits these current levels. There's another way that you can set it based on your speed. The speed max is 50% for level 1 and 100% for other levels. I thought, that's crazy. But the current is almost assuredly the original limiter rather than the speed. Also, if I'm going downhill on level 2, I don't want that throttled. The throttling will happen at the current level, if that makes sense. So when I go downhill, it's very likely that I'm going to be coasting on this anyways. It's going to have so much weight to it because of the motor and whatnot that it just may as well do that. Also, that conserves battery. You could arguably turn off the assist when you go down hills, but I think just coasting would be perfectly fine and going down to assist level 1. Learning more about all of this is interesting, but I got to stop fooling around and pull out my bike stand and get this sucker on there and start the process, because I've got, about maybe 3 hours of sunlight left. And if I can get this on and secured well enough, it would be neat to see how this goes. I am not going to record the frustrated audio of me putting this together. It's better to do it without distractions, but I will be back to talk more about it in a moment. All right, we are at 11:30 p.m. Remember how I had a goal of getting this put together by sunset? That didn't happen. Here's where we're at. This was predictably not straightforward. Also predictably, I'm finding that I'm going to have to take the thing apart and put it back together again just multiple times. And what's funny is that some of these things were warned and some of them manifested, the problems that I'm about to describe manifested late in the game, long after I committed in certain directions. It's a little confusing why this turned out the way it did. Okay, let's start with YouTube. YouTube is handy, except when it's not. There was one instruction guide I was watching. I'm not going to throw him under the bus, but I kind of want to. He did a step-by-step for beginners tutorial, but kind of ended up skipping steps. And once you get committed, it's like, oh, you got to do that before you put it on the bike. It's like, oh. So there was at least one stage where I had to undo things to put on other parts. I found that frustrating, strange way to approach things. Be careful about various YouTube videos. They do things in parts rather than sort of, here's where you go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. And then sometimes it seems like it's that step by step, but they're actually yada-yadaing a few parts, which are actually kind of important to do in order. So that was the first problem. The second issue is, same guy said, oh, you can't over-tighten this. You can over-tighten it. The outer lock ring for this setup, basically I stripped because I was putting way too much torque on it. It doesn't seem like a huge problem at this point. I probably will purchase a new one. Outer lock rings are there for a reason. For purposes of getting this together, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But there's a lot of heavy-duty action to put on and remove pedals and cranks and if you're going to keep moving forward. So that's a little frustrating. Not catastrophic, but not great. The guy who built the Ozark Trail, the bike that I'm using, he said, you got to put a spacer in there because the way the brake cable pinches it, you can squeeze the rear brake, but then it doesn't return. Well, it was fine when I put it on. And I tested it a couple of times and it worked just fine. And then just now, as I was set to go and test the bike, the rear brake stuck into place. So I'm going to have to go back and see if I can kind of make a little space. I think what I may do in lieu of that is reroute the rear brake. That's an issue. The shifter cable is also routed through that same spot where the motor is kind of near the bike. It kind of impinges on it. It makes sense why this is a problem. It's weird that manifested so late after I tested it. The shifter seems fine. I think the easiest solution is to reroute that cable. I don't think that will be too difficult. Brake cables are easier than shifter cables. At least that's my perception. The other thing is I went outside right as I was discovering the rear brake situation, which of course I wasn't going to ride with e-assist or any pedal assist with that situation. It was rubbing. I was like, let me see how this feels in no pedal assist mode. I get on and I just spin. There's no chain on this, is there? I did not put a chain on. I'm going to call it a night. It's been a long evening of fiddling, but I'm close. I'm real close. I don't know if I'm going to have time to do this to kind of get it running tomorrow. So it may wait until I get back. That's fine. I really have done quite a bit on this thing. And I think that I'm not at that frustrated point, but I could be quickly. And the place is a mess. You should see this place. I have remote controls, flashlights, bike tools scattered everywhere. Absolute insanity. The animals are kind of done with me too. So I would say this was will I call it a success? I pushed this very far forward. This is the most wrenching I've ever done on a bike. There's much more to come, as I mentioned. We'll see what ends up happening on the next step. But I do think that I see the end of the tunnel here. I think making a fix to the rear brake, getting a chain on, will allow me to do just a quick ride test to see how it feels with pedal assist. And then I'll get things like the brake sensors and the speedometer on there and the shift sensor as well. So that will be completed. And final cable management. It's interesting. Right now it looks janky, but I will definitely have some more zip tying and tucking and routing that I think will make this look reasonably decent. I mean, it's very clearly an e-bike. I mean, you take one look at that battery and it's very clear. But I do think that it's going to look pretty good when all is said and done. The tires, I think, are going to be awesome when I get those tires. And then it's ready for a shakedown. I've got some ideas on that too. All right, I'm going to clean up. I'm going to go to bed. Next time you hear from me, hopefully will be a little chaos management and definitely a chain. I need to put a chain on this bike. All right, it's about 7 o'clock. Come on up here, buddy. You want to come up? Mookie is a little out of breath because he's been chasing me around on an e-bike. Got a chain on there, which wasn't too hard to put on. If you've never known how to size a new chain without an old chain, it's easier than you would think. There's an easy method for it. You can search for it on YouTube, and there's a whole bunch of places that will show you how to do it. That's been something that I've never really known how to do. And so I've done it by more like feels and vibes before on a bike that does not have a derailleur. And in that way, that's no problem. With the derailleur, you do need to be a little more circumspect about it. But there's a very easy way to do it. And it's not hard, and using the Master Link style of chain makes it very easy. And I have a new chain, and that's great. And it took almost every link of the new chain. It's a 9-speed chain, but because the front cog is now bigger, 44-tooth cog on my front, it uses everything except 2.5 links. How'd it go? It went fine. I started with 0 assist and went into 1 and then higher ones and didn't feel a thing. I have a theory, and the theory is this. I do not have the speedometer put on this yet, and I think the system is confused by that for all the good reasons. I decided not to do much more tonight. I was running low on time and needed a little bit of success rather than any failure, so this is where we're going to leave it for this portion of the trip. I'm going to make sure that everything is off and everything is set for it being in storage mode, which it is. I'm excited for the possibilities. I liked the handlebar setup. There's more to be done. I like the screen. I'll have a space for the phone if I decide to put it there. I might do something different with that. I'm still thinking about wire management and a few other types of things as well. But I have to say it is in pretty good shape. The big thing left is the rear brake situation. I completely undid the rear brake to ride safely, which is funny to say, without a rear brake. It would have been grabbing the whole time. So it ended up being the right move for what I was doing. I was circling around on the road in front of my cabin. Everything is about right. The geometry on it is about right. I think that the install seems to be right. I think not noticing the difference between Pedalshift 1 and 9, that's an issue that I think will potentially be fixed when I put in the speedometer. If not, I may have to start from square one in terms of the settings for all of this, because that's just a little curious to me. I was hesitant to go that high, but when I wasn't feeling it in the lower ones, I was like, something is really crazy here, because this is a 750 watt motor and it should tear ass. The other thing that didn't work was the toggle. The thumb thing that you use, it's been a long day, guys. The thumb thing you use to give yourself power, it's throttle. Yeah, that didn't work. I may have turned that off as a safety precaution last night in the settings. It's connected, so I'm not sure what the situation is with that. It is entirely possible that things are damaged in some way, shape, or form. I mean, it's not unheard of to get a bad wire harness. Indications from the display suggest everything is okay, but it could be any of the other wires. I did not mash it between the motor and the frame as suggested by the guy I threw under the bus last night. I'm glad I didn't. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, he was thinking it was necessary for wire management purposes. I think that there's better ways to do it, routing it the way that it's intended, which is behind. Of course, it's going to catch a lot of gunk from the rear tire, but that's fine. It's going to get gunk no matter where it is. In terms of the install, it seems like it's fine. I think that there's just a lot of adjustments to go, and that's kind of exciting because that adjustments are kind of the easier part of all of this. I do have one other thing that I wanted to mention. In the cranks that came with the bike were special in some kind of way, and I don't know the best way. They're angled a bit different, and they're pushed out a little bit further. I was having strike on the chain guard for the left side. So staying opposite the drive side was striking with the provided Bafang cranks. I'm riding now with a Bafang crank on one side and my Ozark Trail on the other side, and I think I'm going to swap out the Bafang one for the Ozark Trail one. The other thing that I ran into, and I didn't mention, is pedals. I have mountain bike pedals that install in a completely different way that has befuddled me. I'm sure I will look this up, but it doesn't have a spot where you can kind of wrench them on like a traditional pedal. And I just sat there going, okay, I can see where there's like hex keys, but I cannot figure out how to put this on the damn bike. So I am using the old gnarly plastic pedals that came with the bike, and I'll stick with those until I can figure that out, because the other pedals are much cooler. All right, yeah, so I'd say unqualified success? Hell no. Qualified success? Absolutely. And I think that I'm just gonna get better at this kind of a thing as I practice more bike maintenance-y stuff. I think the next few steps when I install and complete everything and put in the sensors and things like that, I think that's gonna be a real test of things, because now we start to get into cables, which I've never done before, and I'm sure I'll screw up. But I bought extra cables and housing. More to come in a few seconds for you, a few weeks for me. It's a few weeks later, and the bike is shaping up. I have everything now, including some replacement parts, but everything has been installed such that I can ride it. I have ridden it. I have ridden it fast, up hills with powerful e-assist. I tested out level 9, and it works pretty good. I'm here to tell you. I made some adjustments to the handlebars so it feels better. I have done a great deal of cable management. I decided not to do anything super fancy with cable management. I don't love it. I would love it if I could hide them completely, but that's a lot of work. Internal cable routing is possible on my bike, but it is just not, it's just not great. So I am doing pretty well with what I've got. The key to that is a lot of zip ties. Mookie is still here barking. The pedals were a problem, and the cranks were a problem, because the cranks with this bike were somewhat necessary. They had more clearance from the hub out, which made all the difference, so I didn't get any strike on the chain guards. So I put those back on, and I was a big boy, and I learned how to put on proper mountain bike pedals. I have never had the kind that go on with a hex key. It's an 8mm hex, and go on from behind. These are going to be a lot easier to take on and off compared to the more typical wrench style. I really like these pedals. It's going to give a little flavor of orange to this bike, which I like. I'm kind of liking the matte gray on this. I haven't decided if I'm going to do any kind of like fancier kind of cover up to cover up the Ozark Trail nature of this bike. It's very prominent branding on the side. I have 2 more major things to do. Actually, I have 3 major things to do. The most important is the final piece of the assembly of the mid-drive system. I've got to do something a little scary if I'm going to undo the derailleur cable, cut the housing and put on a sensor on there. I've watched the videos a few times. It does not look hard. I think it's going to be no problem to do, but I've saved it for last because it's just one of those things that I'm like, I don't want to screw things up. We're starting to enter a lot of territory where it's stuff that I've never done before. So that's something that's happening maybe tonight. The other major thing is I got to take this apart again. I spent some money on a Bafang removal tool and a proper ratchet that has the sensor in it for, I know this has a proper meaning to it, so that I can put the exact amount of torque. Oh, a torque wrench, that's what I have. So that I'll be able to put it on with a proper amount of torque, which I'm kind of happy about. It was an expensive thing overall. The torque wrench was actually not that expensive, but the very specific tool was more expensive. But I think it's going to be worth it because I'll have more confidence in the removal of it. The tool that comes with the Bafang brand is a flat piece of sheet metal. It works fine, but the problem is that it does get in the way of the chainstays, and I'm using a rubber mallet to put extra torque on it or remove it. So I'm not doing that anymore. That's another piece that has to get done. I'm probably going to do that last. And the reason why I have to remove one of the millimeter spacers, I believe I have 3 on the right-hand drive side. That will allow the bottom bracket to go through another millimeter further, which will allow me to put the outer ring on. You may recall that the outer lock ring, I torqued too hard and basically stripped it. I've got a new version of that. When I undo and loosen it, the bigger reason is because I am going to be trying to give a little bit of extra space for the brake line, for the rear brake, and also for, honestly, the derailleur. I'm still not sure why the derailleur has been fine and the brake line hasn't. Maybe the derailleur can handle a little more. Sorry for the squeaking. I'll do that while I talk to you. By putting in the spacer, which I still need to figure out precisely how to do, it will give just that little bit of extra space in between the motor and the frame so it doesn't pinch on those lines. And then I'll put it all back together and torque it down properly and put the outer lock ring on it so that everything is assembled 100% great. And that's it for there. Oh, except I keep forgetting. I said 3 things. My tires came in. My tires came in all the way from the UK. I got them for a song compared to what I've been able to get them here in the States. I still don't understand why, but I'm very grateful. It was a UK-based bike shop or person who sells bike tires at the very least, and they're great. These are the Schwalbe. Let me get the name right because I think I've been mispronouncing this, and I will need, of course, my glasses because I cannot read. Oh, I can say it. It's the AL Grounder or the AL Grounder. They are 29er tires, and they are they 2.3 inches wide? They're either 2.2 or 2.3 inches wide. They have no knobs on them at all. These are much more meant for road and gravel, like light gravel, which frankly is going to be most of my riding, I think. I don't think that there's any problem with the Kenda tires that came with this. They're meant for off-roading. This is a mountain bike in its original design. This is going to substantially improve the friction of the tires on the ground, but they're also grippy and they're Schwalbes, and I have had great luck with them, almost universally great luck with them. So I'm excited to get these on the bike. Brand new Schwalbe tires tend to be a little tight, but I have no doubt that they will fit on this. They're the same size as the current tires, and there's plenty of clearance. Where are we at? You're going to keep hearing from me because there's more to do. This bike has some hops. It is doing well. I am looking forward to having both sets of brakes working, particularly those rears. I would like those back. I'll need to readjust the brakes because the front brakes are not aligned right. Whomever put together this bike did a decent job. I've seen a bunch of horror story videos about how folks come home from Walmart with this bike and they're just not put together very well. Whoever was working at the Martinsburg Walmart did a decent job. A couple of bolts were not torqued down well. The brakes needed a better alignment, which I am learning because this is my first disc brake bike. This is going to do well. My display says I have a 100-mile range with the battery. I suspect that's in level 1 with minimal tills. That's way better than I expected. I also think it's phony. I also am not sure if that's real. I'm really expecting it to be more likely to be closer to 50 or 60, but we'll see. The question will end up being if this has enough juice on it, and if I can get a proper fast charger, an 8 amp charger perhaps, that's going to be the type of thing where I can take an hour or 2 hour break and really re-up add some additional miles. We could get to the point where if I plan out my rides properly, I could be easily getting 100 plus miles per day regularly using this battery, using this bike. And that's pretty exciting. So much more to come on that. My plan for you, the listener, is a shakedown ride. Not in this episode, but in a future episode, perhaps the next one. Yeah, you'll find out in a bit. Where I'm going to take this bike from my cabin to Hancock, Maryland. It is a road route. You have done it from Hancock to here with me, this year, in fact. So it will go easily because it's mostly downhill. I expect not to use the e-bike portion much in that direction. We'll see what I have left in the battery bank. And there is a place in the public park there where I can recharge. I also technically can camp there. I can also camp reasonably close by to there. So I may do an overnight. I may not. I may just do a kind of a day trip. It all kind of depends on how things go. The weather has been spectacular here. And it is, as I'm recording this, August, which is nuts. Normally it is awful. I try to escape during August. I bemoan August, but this week has been fall. This morning it was 55 degrees. It was absolutely stunning. So I know it's going to heat up next week. So the opportunity to take advantage of this really great weather is now. So I may consider doing something this weekend. We shall see. If not, next weekend. If not, some other time in the relatively near future. Again, it will be part of the show. So at least one more, perhaps a couple more entries, including, I think, one while I'm riding, once a bike to its full safetyness, and that means all the brakes working. You'll get the shakedown ride. We've been getting beta rides so far, and I've been impressed. I'm getting used to the notion that it's more like a manual transmission. When I put on the shift sensor, it will become much more like an automatic transmission. Anytime I make a shift, it will automatically cut the e-assist, so it will not strain the chain. Lots of cool technology on this. I've assembled the brake sensors, so when I squeeze on brakes, it will automatically cut the motor. A bit of a stream of consciousness, a little bit of a ramble, but there was a lot to talk about. I'm excited because now that I have the new pedals on, I'm excited to see how this thing pedals with new pedals and all of the various things that are going to be coming about as this bike evolves into its final configuration. So, more to come. It is the next night. It's a Friday. I just did some additional work on the bike. I decided to skip the shift sensor for the moment. Because of the internal cabling, there's very little cable that goes from the frame to the rear derailleur. And I'm a bit nervous about that. There is a way you can do it on the front of your bike, closer to the shifter itself. I have more space up there. I just haven't seen a video on how to do that yet. The thing that is concerning me is the right brake, the rear brake. I've tightened the motor a couple of times, and it continues to pinch the right brake over time. When I first put it on, I didn't have any issues whatsoever with the right brake, and it developed over time. And so what I think the motor is being used, it is starting to lift up and tighten up against the frame, which is probably good because the opposite way would be, well, worse. But the downside to that is that it is tending to want to pinch against that cable. When I took it off the first time tonight, I noticed that the reason why it is more affected than the derailleur is the fact that it is sticking out a little bit more. So I am going to have to figure out some kind of a spacer that is going to be able to protect the pinch point. And it's easier said than done. I'm going to have to craft something or build something, or I may even try to use some simple things like spacing it with some double layer of an old inner tube, perhaps. I don't know. I'm going to have to experiment with this. But this is one of those things that if it happens while I'm on the road, it's pretty catastrophic because I'll end up having to ride the rest of that ride with no rear brake. I just don't care for that. On these test rides tonight, it was great to have both brakes for as long as I did, and then all of a sudden I didn't. So I have to figure something out. The good news is that because I spent the silly money, I think it was over $80 total for the torque wrench, and most importantly for the special fitting, is it a ratchet head? I don't know tools, but the tool specific for the Bafang lock ring is very easy to get on and off now, which it wasn't before. So I have no problem doing this again tomorrow to dial this in a bit. It's a bummer because I wanted to take this ride tonight and feel for a proper shakedown ride. But right now, I'm not feeling confident. The other thing I have to do is to put on the new tires, but I'm going to hold off on that until I have this whole motor and brake situation figured out a little bit more. So that's kind of where we're at right now. The fun part about a build like this, rather than just purchasing it, is that I'm feeling like I really know this bike a lot quicker than I ever would if I just bought something straight out. And that's cool. I'm learning a lot about the mechanics of the bicycle. One other thing that I have found that is interesting, I don't quite know. Oh, wait, you know what? I see another issue. I am getting really bad at working with my rear derailleur. I think that I am messing it up. It looks wrong right now. Looks like it is improperly threaded. The chain is popping out as I ride. That's, of course, a huge problem. And I don't know if that is because the derailleur is borked or something else, but I'm noticing this now. And the reason why I'm noticing it now is earlier when I did 2 test rides tonight, the chain seizes up, the derailleur comes up and the chain locks. Now I think that it is in the process of doing it again because it has come off of one of the flywheels and is improperly put on there. So I am going to have to figure this out. I may have discovered a problem that is a serious issue with this situation and may have to get a new derailleur for this, which would be the argument for getting a better bike in the first place. But one of the things that was argued with this bike is that the rear derailleur was fine, but it wasn't a SRAM or anything. It's fine for a mountain bike, not necessarily an e-bike. And I'm wondering if maybe this derailleur is just not liking the fact that it's going to be getting more power through it. Just a discovery right this moment. More to come. I now feel the odds of an actual shakedown ride this weekend are much lower. I'm also learning more about the power of this motor and how things that look right aren't exactly as they seem. And now that Mookie has his toy again, I'm going to leave you all alone. It is the next day. I was up a little bit later last night, messing around with brakes and had some success. The rear brake is still squishy. So I'm still considering to undo the motor and see what I can do about putting a spacer in there. For the moment, it's functional. After the test ride, it remained functional, but it's squishy. And I just don't know if I can trust things on a longer term ride until I resolve that. So that's still on there. The big thing I did was putting on those Schwalbe rounders. It sounds like Al Bundy. I don't know. There's a reference for you. Americans probably only. So the tires are great. They ride really nicely. And of course, they've got that extra punch protection, which I appreciate. They do, as with all Schwalbes, go on pretty tight. But I'll say the Kendas felt like they were cemented on. They felt like glued. I was really kind of struggling with it and finally was able to get them off with the same kind of tricks that I used to get my Brompton tires on and off, because those are very tight as well. But it rode really well. I don't think that there is a derailleur problem. I mentioned that at the end of the last segment. I need to be careful about how I shift. That goes back to getting that shift sensor in there. I think that that might be a piece of what's going on with all of that. But it's working pretty well. Am I comfortable enough to take this out for a longer ride? No, I don't think so, because the times when it's failed, when the chain is seized up, it's problematic because you can't even cycle without the battery at all, without the motor engaged. So it would be a push, and I don't want to go that far without feeling like I've got the ability to fix that. I could bring, of course, my Master Link tool to unengage the chain. That certainly would be a possibility. I think that's probably the smart bringing tools for a proper shakedown ride. I'm just going to go out further and further. I've put a few miles on the bikes, but it's been only on my street. But my street is nice because there are a couple of steep hills and it handles them well. I'm still learning what makes the most sense for hills like that. I think that the answer is, for a long hill, putting it into the lowest gear and doing just a minimal battery assist. But if it's a short, steep hill, pumping up that the energy output and just kind of cresting over the thing pretty quickly and easily, that's, I'll have to admit, kind of fun. I'm still reluctant to go to higher levels until I feel more confident about the bikes. Overall, I'm happy with how things are going. Literally, the only thing that needs to go on there that I've got everything for is that shift sensor. So that's going to be the next thing that I'm going to try to figure out. The cable management seems to be working really well. I may find myself undoing and redoing some of those things. Oh, I should mention, I moved the light. The light was in the wrong place. It was basically shining at the top of my tire and doing very little. It's hard to tell if this is a B scene or a C kind of light. I don't think it's terribly powerful, so I think it's more of a B scene kind of light. So maybe it does make sense to put down there above the shocks, essentially, and certainly would be helpful for the be seen aspect. And I would just have another light for my ability to see at night, which I think is necessary with a bike like this. If I'm doing long days in the saddle, then I am going to need to be able to handle some lighting scenarios. The other thing that I could do is just frankly replace this lamp and get something a little bit better. It runs off a main battery, and that would certainly be something to do. I also have the opportunity to maybe put a rear light on, but I've been happy with battery-powered ones. These are things to think about in the medium and longer term. My big thing is, can I get this thing functional? Can I do some shakedown rides? And can we have an episode e-biking in the very near future? All right, so we have advanced to a new stage. I am comfortable enough with the bike to go on a mini shakedown ride. Let me explain what I did. I struggled a lot. Big thing was getting the final tire on. That went pretty well. The next stage was figuring out the best way to handle the motors and the pinching. I am still going to consider doing a variety of other things because this is an incomplete fix at this point as far as I'm concerned. I considered a variety of different options, including putting in a bolt, putting in a brace that was basically an unused piece of a fender. None of it was going to work. The space in there, it's impossible to describe, but it's very small. It wraps under the bottom of the bike, under the bottom bracket. The two lines run into the frame where the motor, so there isn't a great system. Honestly, the best thing I could do would be to reroute the cables, but I prefer not to because it would look janky. I would have them come out externally rather than internally. I do like the internal cabling, even though, of course, I have a million wires now, very nicely zip tied, but they're all external. So I could run it along those. That would not be that big of a deal. But I'm trying to stick with the way things are right now. So what was my solution? I ended up taking some electrical tape and cutting a piece of old inner tube and basically just created a pillow on one side of the cables. The shifting cable has never had a problem. The brake cable clearly has. And that seems to be putting enough of, or taking enough pressure off of the braking cable that it brakes and returns consistently. It's still a little soft. It does not return as well as I would like. I need to keep adjusting the brake line. We're in an adjusting phase with that, but I don't think that this is the final solution, but I do feel comfortable enough after riding around my cabin. I think I'm ready for more of a shakedown ride. One thing I've noticed that was interesting is my battery meter keeps saying 100%, and that doesn't seem likely to me. The battery itself has a little meter on it, and it was down 1 LED light's worth out of, I think, 4 or 5. So I don't know if it's really around 80% or if it goes below 100. If it does that, it just hasn't registered on the screen that I have. So I'm a little concerned about that because I really would like to know what how much battery I have at any given time. So that's another part of what the shakedown ride is about. The question is, do I go all the way to Hancock, about 20 miles and back? That's 40 miles round trip. It's a little less, probably like 36 to 38 if memory serves. That certainly could be possible. It's going to be hot tomorrow. So if I decide to do an all the way to Hancock kind of a ride, I'd do a few things. I'd bring some tools with me in case I did have a problem. I'd also bring the battery charger with me, potentially if I really did lose charge, if it goes down to about half or less, then I know I would have a problem coming back because it's going to take far more battery coming back than going down because it's mostly downhill there and more uphill back, although there's exceptions in a few spots. I'm going to decide what to do tomorrow morning. I don't need to go all the way to Hancock to do a proper shakedown ride. I could do something far less than that. I could just stay in this general area. There are big hills I could test on, and it's local neighborhood riding. I think I could do well with that. I want to see this thing do some distance though and see how it feels, how comfortable it is. I already am starting to feel that I like the grips. They're a German grip that's very similar to the Ergons, but it's all I've got. And while that's very comfortable and typically what I use for my Brompton, I have little horns that give me another hand position. So I'm thinking of adding those as well later. But that's what a shakedown ride is going to tell me. It's like, what's the comfort situation? The other thing that I noticed is the saddle. Even though I'm normally good with stock saddles, this is a very inexpensive saddle. So I am considering swapping out a saddle that I have on the Goblin, actually, which actually wouldn't be a terrible idea as I think about this. The Goblin lending a piece of itself to this bike. I think that actually would be kind of cool. So I may do that just to see if that feels better. It's a better stock saddle than the one on this Walmart bike. The tires are great. I may have inflated them a little more than I needed. They go from 26 to 52 PSI. I would do the metric for you all who are metric types, but I'm afraid I cannot do that. The idea there will be that you want to deflate a little bit and I'll get a little more cush. The suspension on the front is great. I don't notice it, which I think is good. I have nothing on the back. There's obviously some things I could do on that. There are saddles that have a little bit of suspension in them that I could add. I'm not sure if that would be terribly necessary, but these are the things I'm going to learn when I do more distance on this thing. I like the upright style. It's good for that. I'm still not loving the shifting and doing a lot less of it. I'm used to cranking up and down, but I have something different now. I can change the power that the motor is going to be giving to it. So that's another way to kind of, it would be not downshifting, it would be just quote unquote pedaling harder. But I do want to be mindful that I don't want to do that too terribly often. I also have gotten this bike up to 30-ish miles per hour going down hills. It can get me up to speed very quickly, and it does feel very stable because of the nice wide tires. I think all of these things are really good so far. But yeah, I think I'm ready to put some miles on it and see how it goes. But I do need to make sure that I'm doing a couple of things from a safety perspective. Of course, I'll wear a helmet. I also will bring some tools. I just don't want to get stranded on that thing. And on a couple of occasions, as I mentioned, the chain is seized up. I do think that I want to get it back on the rack before I do this and just maybe re-index it just to see how things go. I think that the fact that the front chain, I have 44 teeth on the front, and it was far fewer than that before. And the 11-speed chain I think it's 11 speed. I'm sorry, it's a 9-speed chain, is really maxed out with that kind of, with 44 teeth, I've noticed. So I think that that's something that I need to kind of consider as a possibility about getting a different, maybe going down to 42 teeth, perhaps, which of course would sacrifice a little bit of speed, but I'm not interested in a lot of speed. I'm interested in making sure this thing shifts really well and can climb really well. And speed is not something that is a high priority for me. Although I ultimately, I do want to be able to kind of average 18 to 20 miles per hour on rides. So having the ability to do that with 42 teeth would be really important. So I'm rambling. These are thoughts when working on a bike like this. But I feel like things are looking up. There are things I will need to do. It will be interesting to see if a bike shop will touch this. I've thought, what if something screws up and I'm out and I don't have the ability or desire to carry all the tools to kind of handle that kind of stuff. I've heard horror stories of bike shops going, oh, we're not going to touch an e-bike. But ultimately, this bike is not an e-bike at heart. The brakes are still regular brakes with cables. The shifter is exactly the same thing too. So hopefully I will not run into any problems. And I suppose as e-bikes become more predominant, I think there'll still be more and more shops will look at it. But I've heard that a lot of shops aren't terribly interested in doing that because of liability issues. And I think I talked about that before earlier. Doing this particular podcast over the course of many days and weeks even tends to lead you to forgetting what you said before. So next up is a shakedown ride. How big or far remains to be seen. This is going to be the final installment of this particular run of chats. And that is because I feel pretty confident in the e-bike right now. Confident enough that I think it's shakedown ride time. I'll tell you a little bit about what I did. I rode a couple of miles, unloaded. I still have not ridden loaded on this bike, so that's going to be part of the shakedown ride. And down and around some pretty gnarly steep hills. And I'm starting to get, again, more comfortable with how to handle things without the shift adjuster, which I'm going to do for the near term at least. Turn the power level to 0, do shifting and turn it back on to low levels, and then slowly add power as necessary. For instance, going down a hill, normally I would be looking at kind of upshifting so that I can kind of take advantage of that and pedaling down the hill a little bit more. Now I'm starting to rethink that. It's still possible, of course, but you're in a really high gear as you are at the bottom and going up your next hill, and you need to be able to downshift, but presumably you'd also like to have some of your e-assist. So I think that what I'm going to start to consider doing is downshifting well before, and that's tricky with speed because you have to spin a lot, finish the hill with a coast, and as I go up the next hill, I'll add a level 1 or maybe a level 2, and then as things kind of start to slow down, I spin into that, the e-assist engages in, and then I start going on. If I need more power, which I do on steep Appalachian hills, I slowly add e-assist power going to a level 3, 4, 5, 6. I have not done any hill climbing above a 6 at this point. 6 is robust. It flattens hills, which is exciting. I'm still a little concerned about the fact that my battery is showing 100% at this point. I would have thought with that much of a ride that I would see it go down. So I'm a little concerned that it's one of two things. Either the battery is really big or the metering is off to know more. I'll know quickly when I go on a longer ride. The battery level will go down, and if it still keeps showing 100%, then there's a problem. I do have it set on a 52-volt battery, and everything seems fine. I will say I'm starting to have a recollection that I think that the battery itself might have said that it was 48 volts, which wasn't what I ordered. But I should check that out, and maybe if that's the case, make the adjustment and see if that changes things. It's tricky when you purchase stuff and don't build it yourself. You kind of have to go with what's on the label. So I think that overall, my confidence level for the bike has gone up. I do need to make a few more adjustments. Number one, the lowest gear my bike is not shifting into. And I did some tinkering with the cable on the rear derailleur, and I think I may just need to re-index things, which of course is not too difficult to do. I'm hoping it's not the pinched cable situation. I haven't noticed the problem with the derailleur, just the brakes. My little brace should be enough, but we'll see. So that's something that needs to be handled. And then I do need to tighten up the rear brake a little bit more. Again, the return isn't as robust as I would like. I think that there's a pretty good argument that can be made that I should put in a thicker little brace in there to make it so that the motor isn't as snug. That should help. So that's another thing that I'm going to be considering doing before I do the shakedown ride. On the next episode, you will be hearing a lot more about the shakedown ride. My plan is an overnight in Hancock, probably on the C&O, although there's a possibility I may consider camping at that city park. And the reason is that I could charge my battery overnight. I'm a little sketched out on Hancock. I'm not 100% sure that I would leave it out overnight, but that's for the next episode. We'll get much more into the preview. I don't know what it's going to look and feel like. Is it going to be a camping thing? Is it not going to be a camping thing? That'll be for the next episode. I hope this incredibly lengthy episode about this build has been somewhat helpful. I do feel like it's been a bit rambly at times, but I've been taking you along on this build. I've been learning as I've been going along, and I thought I would share that with you through these audio entries. New bike. The e-bike, I have no name for it. I'm not sure whether there's more to add to it. Right now, we're at minimal viable e-bike, and that is exciting. It is fun to have this, and I'm excited for the doors it opens in terms of bicycle adventures. The next time you hear from me, it's going to be about the preview episode for the very first real adventure with this bike.
All right, folks. As you have now made it through this entire journey, a couple of things. Next episode, we are going to be doing a preview of my shakedown ride. And then the next couple of episodes after that, we'll get into the actual ride and the camping experience and all of the various things with this new e-bike. Very excited to bring you along for the ride on this. And just stick around because we've got brand new adventures on a brand new bike coming to you on the show. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community. Expanding into live shows and covering new tours, if you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zaranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Bigel, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Kropke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Azuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponsella, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Cyrus Faravar,
John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.